Hello, I'm with Brian Menell, who's the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of TechMet. Delighted to go and have you with us today, Brian.
Thank you very much, Andrew. It's great to be with you.
Brian, I'd like to ask you a few questions about TechMet. You've been evaluating the Dobra lithium project in central Ukraine since 2023, and you're preparing a bid under the US-Ukraine minerals deal. Given the ongoing geopolitical tensions and the reconstruction dynamics, how does TechMet plan to balance investment timing and local partnership development to ensure long-term viability?
And what we've been doing with respect to Dobra, apart from looking at the historical exploration data, which dates from Soviet time, in order to assess the potential merit of the project from both a strategic and value point of view, and it has merit, is discussing with the Ukrainian government, which we've been doing over the last year and a half, the process through which they will award the rights. And what we've been pushing very hard for is a transparent production sharing agreement type process and agreement. And we have finally achieved that objective. And a few days ago, the Ukrainian government did announce the formal commencement of a PSA tendering process for Dobra, which we will participate in. That obviously will result in the award of the rights, and we hope to us and our partners, and it will result in us therefore having the opportunity to proceed with confirmatory exploration and feasibility study work to identify the scale of potential, with a view to us, together with others, investing in large-scale mining and processing development for lithium in the Ukraine. That will then feed into the Ukraine US Resources Fund, which is part of the agreement underpinning peace and stability and security, all of which are a prerequisite for large-scale investment and development. So it all ties together with the US-sponsored and supported process.
Mm-hmm. And moving on to your other investments, you've obviously mentioned a little bit in answer to your previous question about the supply chains and de-risking supply chain investments. What benchmarks or frameworks are you using to measure resilience, and how do you go and de-risk your supply chains in general?
If you're referring to the supply chains feeding projects that we're building or capacity that we're expanding across what is now 10 operating companies under TechMet, they all have unique circumstances. We're quite heavily weighted towards the US, where 4 of our 10 operations are and more than half of our value. And the projects we're building or expanding in the US are largely dependent on US supply chains for equipment and for consumables and materials, and therefore not vulnerable to global supply chain disruption or insecurity, whereas certain of our other projects in Africa, South America, are more subject to disruption, and therefore we have to do much more work defining the resilience of those supply chains in order to ensure that we don't interrupt the successful execution of any of those programs. It's not, we do control the inputs to most of our projects, and therefore for us, it's not one of our biggest challenges. It's something we obviously deal with and apply our minds to every day, but much bigger challenges are competing with China in terms of cheap money, competing with China in terms of economies of scale and economics of processing, particularly, and extraction, all of which are what sort of drive us to do what we do.
Mm-hmm. You've just kind of mentioned there about China's dominance, and I understand that one of the reasons why TechMet was launched was to reduce China's dominance in critical minerals and to build up EU-US supply chain security. As a business with a portfolio spanning lithium, nickel, vanadium, rare earths, and battery recycling, how do you prioritize capital deployment? What metrics define success across upstream mining versus downstream processing or recycling?
Yeah, I mean, from inception, TechMet has sought to give our investors, both sovereign funding agency investors, such as the DFC as a US government funding agency, and now the QIA as the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Qatar, who's become a big investor in TechMet, and the family offices and others, a balanced exposure to what we believe are the key metals feeding transformative technologies that are changing the global landscape, batteries, electric vehicles, renewable energy systems, data centers, robotics, drones, national security driven industries. And therefore, that's what we continue to do. So as you mentioned, we target 7 metals and we deploy capital to build value fairly well spread across those 7 metals. We also have chosen from inception to deploy capital and build projects across the middle portion of the value chain. So we seek to be fairly well spread in value across mining, processing, refining, and recycling. And all of them are necessary parts of resilient, secure, well-governed supply chains, and all of them are overwhelmingly dominated by Chinese interests. So it all ties in with our overarching strategic rationale of being hopefully at the forefront of transforming supply chains in alignment with US, European, and other economic allies' needs.
Can you share a little about how TechMet is incorporating recycling, reuse, or circular economy principles into your existing planned projects?
Yeah, again, from inception, we've put quite a lot of focus on recycling of lithium-ion batteries as a necessary element of the battery metal supply chain, which has to be an important part of the landscape over the coming years. And we believe that in 10 years' time, over 20% of the inputs of battery metals into the manufacture of new batteries could come from a properly optimized recycling ecosystem. So that we've done. We funded and built a company called Lifecycle, listed in the New York Stock Exchange, exited from it, and have since been investing in a next generation lithium-ion battery recycling company, Momentum Technologies in Texas, and we've built a significant demonstration plant in Texas and are busy preparing to build our first commercial plant in Ohio. So that's very important. We also do the processing of industrial waste products for specialty vanadium products through US Vanadium in Arkansas. And we try across all of our assets to have a low environmental impact, low carbon footprint approach to process technologies and project design in order to develop as cleanly and responsibly as possible as we scale across the supply chain.
Mm-hmm. And just on your engagement with governments, both the current US administration and also with Europe as well, how is TechMet engaging with Washington, Brussels to translate that ambition into concrete investment and infrastructure rollouts?
Clearly, as global trade tensions increase, and they will with ups and downs over the coming years, there is a added focus on the prioritization of policy measures to add to supply chain security for critical minerals in the US, as there is in Europe, as there is in Japan, as there is in Korea. When you have a more fragmented, less globalized, less efficient trading global environment, you need to worry even more than you did before about the security supply of key inputs to ensure national security and industrial competitiveness. And across all of our metals, that takes place in the context of a geopolitical landscape where China is overwhelmingly dominant. And therefore, there's a massive push to deploy more capital and provide more support in Washington from a range of government departments, all of whom we're busy with. Obviously, we're part owned by the US government through the DFC, with whom we're doing more, both at the TechMet level and the project financing level. We are doing a lot of work with Department of Energy, Department of Defense, XM, again at the project funding level to build capacity to supply US industry and national security. We are doing similarly at an earlier stage with some of the European Union critical mineral supply chain security agencies and initiatives in Brussels and Berlin and Paris, and likewise in Tokyo. So we work with a lot of governments to mobilize support to build secure supply chains. And we have partnered with apart from the Qatari government and the US government, who are obviously substantial investors and shareholders of TechMet, we have also partnered with the UK government through the UK National Wealth Fund, with whom we've co-invested in Cornish Lithium equity. Again, I believe it was their first ever. We've co-invested in Norway with the Norwegian State Climate Fund and the Swedish state-owned mining company LKAB to build a rare earth separation plant in Norway, which we have now completed and are busy commissioning. So we do, as TechMet, do a lot of work with government agencies in the context of global critical mineral supply chain security.
And one last question. You're speaking at Resourcing tomorrow on the 2nd to the 4th of December, and I always like to ask sort of slightly out of the box questions to all of our speakers. What is the one book or the 3 books that have most greatly influenced your life, and why?
I would say number 1 is Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela, partially because I had the enormous privilege of having known Nelson Mandela and spent a lot of time with him in the latter years of his life, but largely because he and the book that describes his journey in his life reflect some of the key values that I think underpins anybody's success if they want to build relevance and significance and value to the world. And that is the value of extreme determination and resilience and clarity of thought. You know, Mandela survived 27 years in jail and played the role he played in the transition in South Africa without the bloodshed and disruption and damage that most people thought was inevitable, because he had extreme discipline and extreme determination and extreme confidence and clarity of thought and consistent adherence to his values and his vision. And those, you know, in his case, it was very extreme, and he was a very remarkable man who it's difficult to emulate, clearly, because he was quite unique. But nonetheless, all of those key values, which resulted in him playing the role that he played in South Africa and in the world, are ones that should be at the forefront of all of our aspirations if we want to make a difference to the world.
Brian, thank you very much for your time today. We look forward to welcoming you to Resourcing tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Andrew.